They called me his shadow, but I was the storm waiting to shatter his empire. The chandelier above glittered like 1,000 tiny daggers, each catching the light and stabbing it back into the room. I stood in the middle of the Houston Hilton's grand ballroom, my champagne flute trembling in my hand, the bubbles long gone flat. Around me, the city's tech elite clinked glasses, their laughter sharp and hollow, their eyes darting like predators in tailored suits. This was Brandon's night, my husband, the newly minted CEO of a tech startup that had just secured a 9-figure deal. I was supposed to be the proud wife, the glowing accessory to his triumph. Instead, I was a wound, raw and bleeding, dressed in a navy blue sheath dress that suddenly felt too tight, too exposed. Rachel, right? Brandon's assistant? The voice slithered into my ear, dripping with condescension. I turned to face a woman in a crimson gown, her lips curled into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. She was one of Brandon's investors, a venture capitalist named Vivian something or other, her name as forgettable as her tact. No, I'm his wife, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Her eyebrows arched, and she let out a laugh, high and brittle, like breaking glass. Oh, honey, same difference. You're so lucky to have landed a man like him. What a catch, right? A real rags to riches story for you. The words hit like a slap, but it was the laughter from the small crowd around her that twisted the knife. They didn't even try to hide it. A few men in tuxedos chuckled, their eyes sliding over me like I was furniture. A woman in a sequined dress leaned in, whispering loud enough for me to hear, she must be thrilled to just tag along. My chest tightened, a hot flush creeping up my neck. I wanted to scream, to hurl my glass at the chandelier and watch it shatter, to tell them I wasn't just some trophy wife. I'd been a teacher, damn it. I'd shaped young minds, graded papers until midnight, poured my soul into kids who needed someone to believe in them. But here, in this glittering cage, I was nothing but Brandon's wife, a shadow in his spotlight. I glanced at Brandon across the room. He was laughing, his arm around a colleague, his teeth flashing white under the lights. He didn't see me. He never did anymore. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, judging, dismissing. Vivian's voice cut through again. So, Rachel, what do you do? Besides, keeping the home fires burning? The snickers around her grew louder, and I felt something inside me snap, not loudly, not violently, but quietly, like a thread stretched too thin. I set my glass down on a passing waiter's tray, my hand steady despite the storm in my chest. Excuse me, I said, my voice calm, almost robotic. I turned and walked out, my heels clicking on the marble floor, each step a countdown to something I couldn't yet name. Outside, the Houston night was humid, the air clinging to my skin like regret. I slid into the driver's seat of our Lexus, the leather cold against my thighs, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the neon glow of the city skyline, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. I wasn't just humiliated, I was erased. 36 years old, a decade of marriage, a career I'd given up to support Brandon's dreams, and this was what I got, a room full of strangers laughing at my expense, reducing me to a punchline. I thought about the early days, when Brandon and I were just two kids in love, scraping by in a one-bedroom apartment. I'd stay up late with him, brainstorming ideas for his startup over cheap coffee, my lesson plans spread out on the table next to his coding notes. I'd believed in him, in us. I'd quit teaching when his company took off, thinking it was temporary, that I'd go back when things settled. But temporary turned into years, and somewhere along the way, I'd become invisible. To him. To everyone. The memory of Vivian's smirk burned in my mind, her words looping like a cruel song, "You're so lucky to have landed a man like him." Lucky. As if I'd won some cosmic lottery instead of building a life with someone who now treated me like an afterthought. I started the car, the engines hum a low growl that matched the one rising in my chest. I wasn't going to let this be my story. I wasn't going to be the woman who smiled through the insults, who stood by her man while he basked in glory and she drowned in shame. That night wasn't the night I was trampled. It was the night I began to fight back. Not with shouts or tears, but with something colder, sharper, a plan. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I could feel it taking shape, a quiet war brewing in the silence of my resolve. I drove home, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red, my mind racing faster than the car. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd shelved, every time I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace. No more. When I got home, I didn't go to bed. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Brandon and I used to dream together, and opened my laptop. I started typing, not sure what I was writing at first, just words, fragments of anger and hurt. But as the hours passed, they began to form a list, every slight I'd tolerated, every promise broken, every moment I'd let myself shrink to make him shine. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger, a reckoning. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew it was the beginning of something. A map to take back what I'd lost. The front door clicked open at 2 a.m., Brandon's footsteps heavy on the hardwood. "Ratch? You still up?" His voice was casual, oblivious, like he hadn't noticed I'd left the party hours ago. I closed my laptop, the screen's glow fading to black, and looked at him. His tie was loosened, his eyes glassy from too much bourbon. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady, my heart a furnace. "I'm up." That night wasn't the night I was trampled. It was the night I began to take back everything I'd sacrificed. The kitchen clock mocked me, its ticks slicing through the silence of our sterile Houston mansion at 3 a.m. My laptop sat closed on the table, but the ledger of Brandon's betrayals burned in my mind, each slide a fresh cut. His bourbon-soaked voice from hours ago lingered, oblivious to the chasm splitting our life apart. I wasn't the woman who'd fled that gala, my navy dress now a crumpled ghost in the laundry. Something had snapped inside me, not with a scream but a quiet, deadly shift. I wasn't just wounded. I was a blade, sharpening itself in the dark. Brandon's absence crept in like poison, slow at first, then undeniable. Late nights at the office, calls he took in the garage, his phone now locked with a passcode he never shared. I'd catch him smirking at texts, his thumbs flying, then he'd shove the phone in his pocket when I entered the room. "Work stuff," he'd mutter, his eyes sliding past mine. I wanted to believe him, to cling to the man I'd loved in our broke, dreamy days. But doubt is a thief, stealing trust one suspicion at a time. When he blocked me from our bank account, citing security upgrades, my heart sank. This wasn't neglect. This was a lie, deliberate and cruel. I called Natalie Burks at dawn, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. My best friend since our UT Austin days, Natalie was a cybersecurity genius who could crack a server faster than I could brew coffee. We met at a noisy midtown diner, the clatter of plates masking my trembling hands. I slid a USB drive across the table. "Track his phone," I said, my words sharp as glass. "I need to know where he goes." Natalie's hazel eyes searched mine, concern flickering. "Ratch, you okay?" I didn't answer, just pushed the drive closer. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, a silent promise. 5 days later, we sat on a bench by Buffalo Bayou, the humid air thick with secrets. Natalie opened her laptop, her face grim. "You sure?" she asked. I nodded, my jaw clenched. A map flared to life, red dots tracing Brandon's lies, hotels in the Galleria, a Montrose condo, a dive bar in the Heights. My pulse pounded, but I didn't flinch. She clicked a folder, revealing call logs and texts to an unknown number. One message read, "Miss you already. Tomorrow?" My stomach twisted, but tears didn't come. I was beyond grief, forging rage into something colder, sharper. Then came the shock. Natalie hesitated, then opened an encrypted file. I dug deeper, she said. His cloud backup had photos. My breath caught as she clicked. There was Brandon, laughing in a dimly lit restaurant, his arm around a blonde woman. Her face was half turned, but his smile, the one I hadn't seen in years, gutted me. Another photo showed them in a hotel lobby, her hand in his back pocket, intimate, brazen. I gripped the bench, my nails digging into wood. "There's more," Natalie whispered, pulling up a receipt for a $3,000 necklace from a boutique I'd never stepped foot in. "Not for me. Never for me." I hired Carl, a private investigator, the next day. A grizzled ex-cop with a voice like gravel, he met me in a strip mall Starbucks, my sunglasses hiding sleepless nights. "Follow him." "Photos, receipts, everything," I said, sliding an envelope of cash across the table. Carl nodded, no questions asked. 4 days later, his email hit my inbox. I opened it in my car, parked outside a Target, the engine's hum drowning out my ragged breaths. The first photo was a knife, Brandon and the blonde, her lips on his neck outside a downtown Four Seasons. Another showed them at Etchy, clinking wine glasses, his hand on her thigh. Receipts confirmed dinners, hotel rooms, a life I wasn't part of. My phone buzzed. Brandon's text, "Late meeting with the COO. Don't wait up." The timestamp matched the hotel photo, his tie loose, her lipstick smudged on his collar. I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. He didn't just lie. He thought I was too stupid to notice. I opened my laptop, created a file called Betrayal Log, and poured in every shred of evidence, Natalie's maps, Carl's photos, bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals. Each entry was a brick in a wall I was building, not to keep him out, but to bury him. The next shock came by accident. I found a hotel keycard in his jacket pocket, tucked inside a receipt for a $500 spa day. The date matched a night he'd claimed to be at a conference in Dallas. I drove to the hotel, a sleek tower in River Oaks, and sat in the parking lot, watching. At 9 p.m., Brandon's BMW pulled up. She stepped out with him, the blonde, her laugh carrying across the lot. They vanished into the lobby, and I snapped a photo with my phone, my hand steady despite the fire in my veins. I wasn't spying. I was hunting. Back home, I added the night to my log, 9:02 p.m., 2301, Fountain View Drive, blonde woman, red dress, lobby embrace. I saved it to a hidden, password-protected folder. Brandon came home at 1 a.m., whistling, his shirt wrinkled. "Good meeting?" I asked, my voice honey-sweet, a trap. He grinned, clueless. "Killed it." I smiled, my heart a furnace. He thought he was invincible, a king. I was his executioner, crafting my blade in silence. Every night, I built my arsenal. Natalie pulled emails, flirty exchanges, coded plans, a receipt for a diamond bracelet I'd never wear. Carl sent more photos, one showing Brandon slipping a ring onto her finger at a rooftop bar, her eyes gleaming. I didn't cry. I cataloged. Bank charges for lingerie, flowers, trips to Aspen. Each discovery was a spark, fueling a fire I'd unleash when the moment was right. The gala had ignited my resolve, but this meticulous collection of his sins, was the inferno. I lay awake beside him, his snores a taunt, his arm flung across the bed like he owned me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind a battlefield. Every lie he told, I countered with proof. Every betrayal, I matched with strategy. I wasn't his wife anymore, not in the way he believed. I was a storm, gathering strength in the dark. His betrayal didn't break me. It remade me. And I was only beginning. The Houston sun scorched the corporate picnic, turning the air into a thick, suffocating haze. I stood under a white tent, clutching a sweating cup of lemonade, its tartness souring in my throat. Brandon was across the field, playing the golden CEO, tossing a football with a grin that masked his lies. My betrayal log pulsed in my mind, a silent grenade of evidence, hotel receipts, photos, texts, each piece a step toward his ruin. But today, something else caught me, a jolt that tore through my armor like lightning. A boy sprinted past, his sneakers kicking up dust, his laughter slicing through the crowd's chatter. Ethan, 5 years old, son of Michael Reed, Brandon's boss. I froze, my heart stuttering as his green eyes flicked toward me, bright and hauntingly familiar. They were Brandon's eyes, the ones that used to crinkle with warmth in our broke Austin days, before ambition carved him hollow. His dimple flashed as he caught a frisbee, a perfect echo of Brandon's younger smile. My cup trembled, lemonade sloshing onto my hand. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But the resemblance was a scream I couldn't silence. I told myself it was the heat, the paranoia from weeks of tracking Brandon's lies. But doubt clawed at me, a beast I couldn't shake. I watched Ethan all afternoon, my eyes glued to his every move, the tilt of his head, the curve of his jaw, the way he charmed strangers with a giggle. It was like seeing Brandon reborn, innocent and untainted, a ghost of the man I'd loved. By the picnic's end, my lemonade was warm, untouched, my mind a battlefield of questions I was terrified to answer. That night, sleep was a stranger. Brandon's snores grated like sandpaper, his arm flung carelessly across our bed. I slipped out, my bare feet cold on the hardwood, and opened my laptop. I scoured company newsletters, piecing together Ethan's birthdate, June 2020. My pulse raced as I cross-checked my log. Brandon's business trip to Dallas that spring, no receipts, no calls. A weekend he'd claimed was a blur of meetings, but Natalie's data showed his phone pinging at a hotel in Austin. The knot in my chest tightened, a noose of suspicion. I needed proof, not shadows. I called Jenna, my old teaching colleague, now a lab tech at a Houston medical center. We met at a dim Montrose cafe, the air thick with espresso and secrets. I slid a manila envelope across the table, my hand steady despite the tremor in my soul. DNA test, I whispered. Off the books. Can you pass it off as a community health study? Jenna's eyes widened behind her glasses, but she nodded, sensing the weight of my request. Rachel, you sure? She asked. I didn't answer, just pushed the envelope closer, my heart a war drum. Getting Ethan's sample was a gamble that made my skin crawl. During the picnic's cleanup, I volunteered to collect stray cups, my eyes locked on a juice box Ethan had abandoned, its straw glistening with his saliva. I slipped it into a Ziploc bag, gloved hands shaking, feeling like a thief stealing innocence. Brandon's sample was simpler, his toothbrush, left on the bathroom counter after a late night of bourbon. I snipped bristles, bagged them, and delivered both to Jenna, masking the drop-off as research for a health article. Every step was a betrayal of the woman I'd been, but morality felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. 3 days later, Jenna's call came, her voice taut as a wire. Meet me at the lab. Now. I drove through Houston's dusk, the skyline a jagged blur of steel and neon, my pulse pounding like a death knell. In her cluttered office, she handed me a sealed envelope, her eyes avoiding mine. It's done, she said. Coded as a public health sample. But Rachel, this is heavy. I nodded, my throat dry, and took the envelope to my car, parked in a deserted lot near the Galleria. The silence was suffocating as I tore it open, the paper crackling like my fracturing world. The results were cold, clinical, 99.9% probability of paternity. Brandon was Ethan's father. Not just a cheating husband, but the biological father of his boss's son. I stared at the numbers, my vision blurring, not with tears but with a rage so pure it felt holy. I whispered to the empty car, not just a liar. You fathered Michael's son. The words were acid, burning away the last of my denial. I didn't cry. I folded the paper, tucked it into my purse, and drove home, my mind a forge hammering out vengeance. The shock wasn't just the betrayal, it was the depravity. Brandon hadn't just slept with the blonde from the photos. A photo Natalie pulled from his deleted cloud files revealed the truth. Laura, Michael's wife, laughing in his arms at a bar, her hand on his chest, dated spring 2019. The affair had birthed Ethan, and Brandon had climbed the corporate ladder on Michael's trust, smiling at his boss while hiding a son. The audacity was a gut punch, sharper than the gala's humiliation, fiercer than the blonde's lipstick stains. I watched Michael at the next company event, his pride as he hoisted Ethan onto his shoulders, oblivious to the lie he lived. I wondered if Laura knew, if she'd buried the truth to save her marriage. I found another photo in Brandon's cloud, a candid of Laura kissing his cheek at a rooftop bar, her wedding ring glinting. The date matched a night he told me he was in Chicago. I saved it, my fingers trembling with purpose, not pain. My log grew, DNA results, photos, timelines. Each piece was a bullet, and I was loading the gun. Lying beside Brandon that night, his snores a taunt, I stared at the ceiling. The gala had sparked my fight, the blonde had fueled it, but this DNA truth was a nuclear strike. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every lie he'd spun, every life he'd poisoned. My heart was a furnace, my resolve a blade. I wasn't broken. I was a storm, ready to shatter his world. The Houston skyline glittered beyond the ballroom's towering windows, a mosaic of ambition and deceit. I sat beside Brandon at the gala celebrating his ascent to regional CEO, my black dress a quiet defiance amid the sea of sequins and silk. His hand rested on mine, a hollow gesture, his smile a polished mask for the crowd. My betrayal log burned in my mind, DNA results proving he fathered Ethan, photos of him with Laura, Michael's wife, hotel receipts, a loaded gun I'd carried for weeks. Tonight, I'd fire. My heart didn't race, it was a metronome, ticking down to his destruction. The room hummed with Houston's tech elite, their laughter sharp, their glasses clinking under chandeliers that cast jagged shadows. I sipped my water, lips grazing the glass, eyes scanning the crowd. Michael Reed, Brandon's boss, stood at the podium, his voice warm with pride. Brandon Hayes, the visionary who's elevated our company to new heights. Applause roared, but I felt only the weight of the USB drive in my purse, loaded with my arsenal. I wasn't the broken wife anymore. I was a predator, coiled in the dark. I'd spent days preparing, my fingers steady despite the fire in my chest. Natalie had helped me craft an email blast, encrypted and timed to strike every executive's inbox in this room. Photos of Brandon and Laura, her wedding ring glinting in a rooftop bar. Folios from the Four Seasons, timestamped with his lies. Bank statements revealing his secret spending, jewelry, trips, a life I was never part of. And the DNA report, the killing blow, Brandon, biological father of Michael's son, Ethan. Each file was a dagger, and I'd sharpened them all. As Michael raised his glass for a toast, I leaned toward Brandon, my voice a soft blade. "You look happy," I said, my smile a veil. He grinned, clueless, squeezing my hand. "It's all coming together, Ratch." His arrogance lit my fuse. I slipped my phone from my clutch, thumb hovering over the send button. My pulse was a steady drum, my resolve ironclad. This wasn't revenge. It was justice, cold and surgical. I pressed send. The email surged, silent as a virus, infecting every phone and laptop in the room. I watched Michael's face as his smartwatch buzzed, his brow creasing. He paused mid-sentence, his glass trembling. The crowd hushed, sensing the shift. He glanced at his phone, and I saw the truth hit, his jaw clenched, his face drained to ash. His glass slipped, shattering on the hardwood, a sound like a world breaking apart. Gasps rippled through the room. Brandon stiffened beside me, his hand dropping mine. His phone buzzed, and he scrambled to check it, his breath catching as he opened the email. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I felt his panic, a wave of heat as he scrolled through the evidence, Laura's laugh in the bar photo, the DNA report's stark numbers, hotel receipts matching his late meetings. He whispered, "Rachel, what the hell?" His voice was a cracked facade, no longer the king's. The crowd's murmur swelled, phones glowing as executives read the email. Michael's eyes locked onto Brandon, not with pride but with a rage that could melt steel. "You bastard," he said, his voice a low growl, slicing the silence. Brandon lurched to his feet, his chair scraping. "Mike, it's a lie, someone hacked me." His words stumbled, desperate, but the room saw through him. Eyes that once worshipped him now burned with contempt, whispers turning to accusations. I stood, my movements deliberate, my black dress whispering against my skin. Every eye followed me, but this time, they weren't mocking. They saw me, Rachel Carter, no longer the CEO's shadow. I walked toward the exit, heels clicking a steady rhythm, each step a verdict. Behind me, Brandon's voice rose, pleading, "It's not what it looks like." But Michael's shout drowned him out, "You're done, Hayes." The words were a gavel, slamming down on his empire. I pushed through the glass doors into the humid Houston night, the air heavy with the scent of rain. My phone buzzed, executives forwarding the email, reporters already circling, but I silenced it. I didn't need to witness the chaos. I'd built it. I'd seen Michael's face collapse, Brandon's arrogance crumble, the room's adoration turn to disgust. I'd torn down the lie he'd lived, the throne he'd built on betrayal. My heart was a furnace, not of pain but of triumph. I drove home, the city's neon lights blurring into streaks of gold and blue. My mind replayed the moment Michael's glass shattered, a mirror of my own breaking point months ago. But this time I wasn't the one humiliated. I was the one who'd struck. I thought of Ethan, his green eyes so like Brandon's, and Laura, her secret exposed. I wondered if she'd known the truth would surface, if she'd dreaded this night as much as I'd planned it. Her pain wasn't my burden. Mine was lifting, a weight shed with every file I'd sent. At home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, my laptop open, the email sent confirmation glowing. I added one final entry to my log, October 15, 2025, 8:47 p.m., email blast sent, 327 recipients, evidence delivered. I saved it, my fingers steady, my breath even. The house was silent, Brandon still at the gala, likely scrambling to salvage his name. He'd come home to an empty bed, a wife who'd vanished from his narrative. I wasn't free yet, but I felt the chains loosening. The gala's wreckage was my foundation, a new beginning built on truth. I'd been invisible for too long, a shadow in his spotlight. Tonight, I'd stepped into my own. The city hummed outside, alive and restless, and for the first time in years, I felt part of it. I wasn't just Rachel, the teacher who'd sacrificed her dreams. I was Rachel, the woman who'd burned a kingdom to ash. And I was only getting started. The news alert hit my phone at dawn, a headline screaming across the Houston Chronicles app, "Tech CEO ousted in scandal, betrayal rocks industry giant." Brandon's face stared back from the screen, his polished grin replaced by a grainy paparazzi shot, eyes hollow, tie askew. I stood in my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom in Montrose, the morning light spilling over bare walls. My betrayal log was closed, its purpose served, but the weight of last night's gala lingered, a shattered glass, Michael's rage, Brandon's empire crumbling. I'd lit the match, and now the city was ablaze with his disgrace. My heart didn't race, it hummed with a quiet, fierce freedom. I sipped coffee from a chipped mug, the bitterness grounding me. The past months had been a war, Vivian's sneers, the blonde's laughter, the DNA report proving Brandon fathered Ethan. But last night, I'd won. The email blast had done its work, exposing his lies to every executive, reporter, and colleague in that ballroom. By morning, Brandon was jobless, his name toxic. Social media churned with gossip, ex-posts calling him a fraud, a cheat. Friends who'd once toasted him now ghosted him, their silence louder than any rebuke. I felt no pity. He'd built his throne on my sacrifice, and I'd torn it down. I moved through my new life with deliberate steps. The apartment was small, but it was mine, rented with savings I'd hidden from Brandon's grasp. I filled it with pieces of myself, a bookshelf stuffed with dog-eared novels, a pot of lavender on the windowsill, a watercolor I'd painted in college, forgotten until now. I'd forgotten how it felt to breathe without his shadow. Mornings were for coffee at Agora, afternoons for gardening in the community plot, evenings for reading under a single lamp. Each act was a reclamation, a stitch in the fabric of a life I'd let fray. One afternoon, Michael Reed called. I met him at a quiet downtown cafe, his face still etched with the gala's aftershock. "Rachel," he said, his voice steady but heavy, "I misjudged you." We all did. He offered me the role of Chief Operating Officer, a position opened by Brandon's fall. I hesitated, the weight of his trust pressing against the pain of his son's paternity. But I saw Ethan in my mind, his green eyes innocent, undeserving of his father's sins. I accepted, not for redemption, but for purpose. I'll do it, I said, my voice firm. But on my terms. The company was a wreck, morale shattered, stocks dipping, whispers of lawsuits. I stepped into the chaos, my teacher's instincts kicking in. I restructured teams, streamlined projects, and listened to employees who'd been ignored under Brandon's reign. My office overlooked Houston's skyline, a view I'd once shared with him in our dreaming days. Now, it was mine alone. Colleagues who'd once dismissed me as Brandon's wife now nodded with respect, calling me Rachel Carter, the woman who'd steadied a sinking ship. Within months, profits climbed, and the board praised my unyielding vision. I didn't smile at their words. I'd learned to trust actions, not flattery. One evening, I sorted through Brandon's old belongings, a box he'd left behind in his haste to flee the city. His tailored vests, symbols of his arrogance, sat neatly folded. I didn't burn them. Instead, I drove to a re-entry program in the 5th Ward, donating them to men rebuilding their lives after prison. The director thanked me, her eyes kind. "You're giving them a chance to start over," she said. I nodded, my throat tight. I wasn't just giving, I was letting go. From my office on the 30th floor, I looked out at Houston's sprawl, its lights pulsing like a heartbeat. The city felt alive, and for the first time, so did I. I'd once taught children to find their value, grading papers until midnight, believing in their potential. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost my own. But now, I'd found it, not in Brandon's shadow, not in the gala's wreckage, but in the quiet strength of rebuilding myself. I was Rachel Carter, not a wife, not a victim, but a leader, a woman who'd turned betrayal into power. My phone buzzed, a message from Natalie. "You did it, Rach. You're free." I smiled, the first real one in years. Freedom wasn't just leaving Brandon, it was choosing myself. I thought of the gala, the moment Michael's glass shattered, the crowd's eyes on me as I walked away. That night, I'd shed the last of my chains. Now, I stood taller, my roots deep in a city that no longer felt like a cage. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, swallowed the pain, or struck back like I did? Share your thoughts, because every choice we make, every truth we face, shapes who we become. From betrayal to triumph, Rachel Carter reclaimed her life. Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? Share your story below, give us a like, and subscribe for more epic tales of resilience. Click the bell so you never miss an update.